We are going to move on now to our program. And I would like to introduce Lori Lacefield, our program director, and she will go ahead and introduce our speaker. Lori.
Thank you, Margaret. A couple of housekeeping things. Mark, how would you like to handle questions tonight? Would you like people to put it in the chat box as you're speaking and I can monitor those, or would you like to wait till the end for a Q&A?
Probably wait for the end, but you can have them if they want to ask questions and they're just there as we go. We'll try to get through as many as we can.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
So I'm very happy to have Mark here tonight. He's the author of 18 novels, including the #1 bestselling Beneath the Scarlet Sky, which if you haven't read, you absolutely should, which has been published in 37 languages and is being made into a limited series starring Tom Holland. Mark has also worked extensively with James Patterson, with whom he wrote 5 #1 New York Times bestsellers in the Private series. Before turning to fiction, he worked as an investigative journalist. Mark lives in Southwest Montana, where he remains grateful for the miracle of every moment. So I'd like to welcome Mark Sullivan.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. And I really appreciate talking about this particular subject. Before I go on, though, I have to apologize if I sound somewhat slurry. I've been going through a series of maxillofacial surgeries that have literally changed the dimensions of my mouth, and I'm still learning how to talk, and I have all sorts of braces on and everything. So excuse me if I'm not enunciating as well as I should be. So what I wanted to talk about today is creative mindset, and in this specific instance, a master's mindset, because I believe that taking this approach to any creative endeavor, any artistic endeavor, will keep you going in this field. Two things. I read something today that Bob Dylan said that his definition of success was that any day he got up and went to bed and everything in between, he did exactly what he wanted. And I love that, because about 30 years ago, I wrote down my definition of success, and it's basically this: any day I get to write, I'm successful. So it's not hard for me to be successful. I'm successful almost every day by my own definition. And the beauty of this is that what I've learned over the course of 30, 35 years of writing novels is that by taking baby steps, by taking small daily successes, they lead to big ones. I heard an interview with Tim Ferriss talking to Jerry Seinfeld about 2 months ago. And Ferriss asked Seinfeld, why do you think you were so successful when so many of your people who grew up around you, your peers at an early age, burnt out and went out? And he said, being a stand-up comedian is a very dangerous thing. It's not good for you mentally, right? You spend all day alone by yourself, and then you go and you perform at night, and there's a bunch of people drinking, and it's just not conducive to a long-term career. And I thought that was brilliant. And yet the other thing he said was that he meditates twice a day. And it's because people who are in a creative field, especially people who write, it's not the best thing for you to do. You're alone, you're in your head, you're in your thoughts, and you have to learn how to control this on a daily basis in order to succeed long term. So one of the things I'm going to do is try to talk to you a little bit about where all this came from for me, and where I arrived at. And the entire theme of this is that the ultimate goal for a writer is a master's mindset. It's not being a bestseller. It's not being a Pulitzer Prize winner. It's having the correct mindset to last and to have a long career. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about. It turned out, after studying this stuff for 30, 35 years, that I believe there are three intertwining paths that we all must walk to get one of these master's mindsets. And I'm going to tell you exactly how you get on these paths and how you should think about it. And I'm hoping that I'm going to give you a path through the trees rather than you having to battle through it. So all this combines in my mind to three things: that body, mind, and heart create state, mindset, and mastery. I'm going to repeat that. Body, mind, and heart create state, mindset, and mastery. So let me go back to a little bit of my history so you know where I'm coming from. So in second grade, I went to St. Anne's Parochial School in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And my dad was the head of the parish council, and my mother was the head of the religious ed program. And I get in a fist fight in the halls of the parochial school. And all of a sudden I'm in the air because the vice principal of the school was a legit 6-foot nun. And she was very badass, and she picked me up, and I figured, and this was in the days where corporal punishment, especially in Catholic schools, was wide open. So I figured I was going to get a swatting, and instead she looked at me and she said, "Your punishment is you're going to enter the grades 1 through 8 short story writing contest." And I'm like, "What?" And she said, "Go do it." And I went home, and again, it turns out that my mother was best friends with this nun. And I figured hell was to pay when I got home, and my mother knew nothing about it. I ran upstairs. She says, "Where are you going?" And I said, I have to write something for school. So I go up, and I have no idea what I'm going to write about. And I'm sitting there and I'm staring into space. And all of a sudden, this little rabbit goes burning through the backyard with a beagle right behind it. And they disappear into the cornfield across the street. And I said, I'll write about that. So I wrote this whole story about this rabbit getting chased all over this farm, the farm that was basically we lived right next to. And I turn it in, and about 3 weeks goes by, and my parents get called into school. And they get in there, and the vice principal slides the story across the table and says, "Which one of you wrote it?" And my dad looks at it and says, "I've never seen that before." And my mom said, "I've never seen it before." And they said, "Why? What is this?" And they said, "Well, it's a short story your son wrote, and he just won the school-wide contest." And I had to get up and read the thing, and everybody loved it and started cheering. And I was like, "Oh, well, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing with my life." In 10th grade, I had a very influential teacher who taught me some of what I'm talking about, especially heart. Her name was Del Stahl, and she was a graduate of the Radcliffe writing program. She worked at Houghton Mifflin, and she took me aside when I was a junior and told me I could be a professional writer. And that only goaded me more. And she helped me get into a writing school at Hamilton College in upstate New York, where I did study writing. It was a lot of it was mechanics, learning how to write essays, but I did take a lot of creative writing. And I got to the end of the 4 years and I realized I had nothing to write about. I mean, no one wanted to read a story about some kid from suburban Boston who ends up in a writing school. So I joined the Peace Corps and end up living on the ancient caravan route between Tripoli and Timbuktu. And more importantly is there was no television, none whatsoever. This was also true of the first 10 years of my life. My dad didn't believe in television. He was all about books. But when I got to Agadez in Niger, there had been volunteers in the town for over 20 years, and there were books everywhere. So I read long and hard for 2 years, and I got an idea of what I wanted to do. And I figured out from a lot of that reading that there were a lot of journalists who became novelists. And I said, I'm going to go that route because I can make a living writing and then turn myself into a novelist eventually. I wrote about Africa, and that got me into the Medill School of Journalism. And there I served a form of apprenticeship. And I tend to believe that writing in and of itself is not an art. At first, it's a craft in the same way that making silver is, or whatever you're going to do that has a process that says apprenticeship. And these are all based on medieval guilds, and they're the trades. And so I had school combined with my first practical experience. But at Medill, I had writing mechanics blasted into my skull. There was no time to think. We were taught to write on deadline. You had to do it right now. You had people screaming at you while you were doing it. Halfway during my master's, I got my first article published about Africa in the Chicago Sun-Times. And it was a tremendous reinforcement that I could actually do this. And I'll get back to reinforcements in a minute. But one day at Northwestern, I was taking a class in ethics, and the teacher said, is journalism or writing a craft or a profession? And everybody in the place said profession. And I said, it's a craft. It's something that, I did it mostly from my own thought process, because I figured if someone could teach someone to be a carpenter, and I took that same approach to writing, that it would do well for me. And it ended up doing well for me. I ended up getting a job at Reuters, and then a place called States News Service in Washington, D.C., where I wrote for some of the biggest newspapers in America. And I did this all with my head in mind. Remember what I said earlier, that my brains, state, and body, mind, and heart create state, mindset, and mastery. It's important to understand, in my opinion, where your head is when you're writing. Are you in your head, or are you in your heart, or are you in your body? All three of them have a place in writing. I just want you to get so good at using all three of them that they become your tools. I did a lot of this. Things like this started popping up a lot in my life. I started training in Aikido about 30 years ago, right around the time that I was really getting going as a journalist. And this whole idea of repetition, craft, skill set, becoming really adept at what you're doing, got reinforced in another part of my life. So I got a job at the San Diego Tribune, and I went there as a journeyman. I wrote every single kind of story you could imagine. And I studied under one of the world's Aikido masters, a guy named Kazuo Chiba Sensei. And he was a harsh taskmaster. We had to learn to meditate, Zen meditation. And as a result of those two experiences, I began to see this interconnecting path towards mastery and how to think about these things. And I began to apply this to basically all aspects of my life, especially writing. I started getting up in the morning and writing fiction, as well as working 50, 60 hours a week as a journalist. And fiction gave me a new path in terms of mastery and trying to go through these steps: apprentice, journeyman, master. And about this time, I got hit with a lot of anxiety and fear, because after 5 years at the newspaper business was starting to crumble. And I got caught in one of the first contractions. And when I went to Southern California, it was a full-on newspaper war. And then all of a sudden they announced that my paper and another paper were going to merge. And these two papers were going to form one, and 175 journalists were going to lose their jobs. So it was a very toxic place to work. The whole process took about 8 months. No one knew what was going to happen. I'm just trying to stay focused. And by the way, I have an infant child, and 175 journalists are about to lose their job. My wife's not working. She's taking a year off, and I start to get panicky. And one night I'm walking up and down. My son had the croup. My wife had gone to bed exhausted. And here comes this guy in a helicopter with big teeth, and he jumps out and he says, "I'm Tony Robbins, and I can change your life." And I looked at him and I said, "You're Tony Robbins and you're a charlatan." I had no idea who he was, but I knew he was in San Diego, and San Diego was a hotbed of con artists. That was one of my staples, was exposing these guys. So I decided to expose Tony Robbins. Instead, I ended up listening to this thing he was hawking. It was his very first product. It was 30 Days to Personal Power. And the majority of the subject was how to master your emotions and make them work for you. And instead, I basically thought I'd listen to one night, understand it was a fraud, and go right after him. Instead, on the 30th day, I quit my job to be a novelist. I quit my job to be who I wanted to be. And the first thing I did was I started working on the idea that emotions could be your ally rather than your enemy, right? That you could get them and you could learn to master them and get them behind you. And the way Robbins teaches you this is he teaches you to use your body in the same way an actor does, right? An actor draws emotion not from their intellectual understanding of the role. They get it by understanding what the physical attributes of someone in that emotional state would be, and then the emotion comes. Because it turns out that your brain and your body know no difference. If you stand up straight, back, arms open, your body will start throwing off chemicals that make you feel positive. If you're hunched over and you're sad and your language is oh me, oh my, you're basically guaranteed to drive yourself into a poor emotional state. And emotional states are critical, especially when writing. Not only are they great for understanding how to write characters, right? Very often what I'll do in a scene is I'll think, where's the emotional center in all these characters? And then I try to imagine what their body positions are doing. And then I get in that position and I write them, right? This is exactly what a method actor does. And I urge you to start studying it. It's really powerful stuff. So I got my first novel bought when I was 34. It got turned down by 17 publishers. It got published by the 18th and was a New York Times notable book of the year. As an aside, no one in publishing knows anything, ever, ever. The only person who knows anything is you. If you know what you're doing and you believe it's good, you're in charge, you know. Everybody else is being reactive and subjective. And you want to listen to them if you're learning and stuff, but on the whole, it's up to you, right? So for the next 2 or 3 years after I published that novel, which did, it was the New York Times Notable Book of the Year, and it got a lot of great reviews. And I take my writing to a different level. And I wrote a book called The Purification Ceremony 31 years after I write the story of the dog and the rabbit. And for the first time in my life, I moved my heart when I'm writing, and I start hearing voices, and I just write this lady down and she basically dictates the whole book. It's a wild, crazy experience for me. I've never had it before this time. And I get a glimpse of what writing can be like in the long term at a level of mastery. I'm writing really well. I win the W.H. Smith Fresh Talent Award. The book is published in 14 languages. I'm a finalist for the Edgar Allan Poe Award. I don't win. James Lee Burke does. But it works. And then because the human brain tends to work in a state of less loss never, after that experience, for the next 7 years, my writing career goes in a series of ups and downs. And I'm mostly locked in fear when it comes to my writing. And so it takes me almost 2 years to write each of the next 3 books. And for the most part, I'm staying fully in my head, right? It's an intellectual pursuit, writing mysteries and novels, and especially suspense novels and mysteries. I write a book called Labyrinth that out of the blue gets bought by Scott Rudin and Paramount. And then I wrote Serpent's Kiss, where, similar to the Purification Ceremony, my heart is in there and I expected it to do well, and it bombs. My publisher screws the whole thing up and it bombs. And right around this time, my little brother proceeds to drink himself to death. This book has bombed, and I'm involved in a long lingering business dispute that takes me to the point of personal bankruptcy. And I realized in February 2006 that I've gotten away from everything, and that basically I'm worth more dead than alive. And I'm on a snowy Montana highway, and I seriously consider driving into a bridge abutment. No one would know, and I don't do it. I see my wife and kids, but I'm rattled. I mean, as shaken as I've ever been in my life. And I go into a Costco parking lot of all places, put my head in the steering wheel, and as those of you who've read Beneath know, I beg God and the universe for a story, something that has meaning, that can give me something where I can do something that matters. And I go into Costco, I do my shopping, I go home. My wife has no idea what's happened, that I've reached this low in my life. But she says, "You've got to go to the Robinsons for dinner tonight." And I said, "I'm not going to any dinner party." She says, "You have to. You know, we've turned them down 3 times. I'm not feeling well. You can go. If you don't feel it, just leave after an hour." And I go, and a perfect stranger starts telling me the story of Pinolella, which is the basis of Beneath the Scarlet Sky. And I begin to realize that once again, that mental emotion can cripple you, and that hard emotions can uplift you, especially as an artist, especially as a craftsman, a journeyman, a master. And oddly enough, months after I returned from Italy, where I go for my first time and spend time with Pinolella, I find out that the book that bombed in the United States had spent 53 weeks on the German bestseller list, and we were saved financially. I mean, I don't know, right? And so I can see quite clearly now that I got to go back to the stuff that I'd learned from Robbins and from other people, that I had to master my mind. I had to get control of my mindset, and how was I going to make it work? And basically, I decide a number of things. One is that I'm only interested in constant and never-ending improvement, that I'm never going to be perfect, that I'm always going to be trying to be better, that I'm always going to try to write, not from my head, but from my heart, because most of you know that the heart has its own nervous system. It's why the heart can exist in a petri dish and beat outside, where if you took your brain out, it wouldn't work, right? I mean, I'm being funny here, but it's true. Long before the central nervous system is formed, your heart is formed. And it's my belief that where every culture on earth, when people get in a conundrum or they're torn between two choices, the first thing people say is, "What does your heart tell you?" And I'm here to tell you that is one of the greatest pieces of advice you can ever get, is to rely on your heart. So I worked for years on my quote heart project, which was Beneath the Scarlet Sky. I wrote it, I researched it. I had to learn to be a different kind of writer than I had been. And I mean, I love every single mystery and suspense story I've written, but I couldn't rely on those skills to tell the story of Pinolella. It was demanding in a way that I had never been demanded before. So I got in a state where I was working on multiple projects, mostly my own stuff, and then the Pinot story, but that was like my back burner. It was my passion project. It was my heart project. And what I got myself into was, I once again connected with the power of habit. You'll hear a lot of writers who are, they get up first thing in the morning and they write. I don't. I get up first thing in the morning and I prepare to write. The first thing I do is I meditate. I can't stress how important this is. There are any number of good meditation programs out there and apps from Headspace to others. I recommend Breathing Room by my meditation instructor, Preethaji. She's Indian and it's fantastic. She has a meditation called the Great Soul Sync. It takes about 11 minutes. It really puts you in your heart. The Indians, they believe that your soul sits in your heart. That's why your heart aches at times. It's why when you feel great joy, your heart opens and thrills. So I meditate every morning, and then I work out and I get myself physically ready, and then I eat, and then I right around 11, then I read a bunch of newspapers because I try to stay fill, right? I'm trying to pour stuff into my vat of inspiration and ideas. And right around 11 o'clock, I turn everything off. And I write from 11 to 5. I used to write like 9-10 hours a day, and I came to understand it was counterproductive. But I was much better off doing the things I'm describing, where I'm meditating, working out, going for hikes, doing something that anchors me and grounds me, and they calm my mind, they strengthen my body, and they open my heart. So I go through a massive increase in productivity. I go from being able to write a book in 18 to 24 months to under 10 months with Triple Cross. And then I write a book called Rogue and I do it in 9 months. But I'm almost out of money again. And out of the blue, James Patterson comes calling me literally the day I finish Rogue and rescues me. And I get to work with the master, right? I get to talk to him. He becomes my mentor. I thought I knew a lot about writing commercial fiction before I started working with him. I really didn't. He's the greatest story genius I've ever encountered. And I used to tell my wife in the first year or two working with him, it was like talking to Yoda, because I was getting a personal crash course in PhD level commercial fiction from the master. And so there's another part of this mastery. Try to find a great teacher. Try to find the best teachers you can find. I believe that in anything. So the master, Mr. Patterson, teaches me the power of working on multiple projects at once, 3, 4. And he shows me, and I'm like, I disagree with it first. And then I see what he's talking about, that your brain seems to like to switch, right? It's why it likes variety. It's why it likes things that are new. So at one point I was working on 3, 2 with him and 1 on my own, and then also working when I could slip it in Beneath the Scarlet Sky. He also taught me the value of establishing the emotional center of every scene and every character. Understand where those characters are in their hearts, not in their minds. Minds are good, right? But no one ever remembers, some puzzle thing that someone figured out. I mean, it's cool, it's interesting, you like it, but people remember books that stir their hearts, that move them. And it doesn't matter if you're writing mystery or suspense novels, you are out to describe the human condition within that stuff. So, by the time I get 5 of Patterson's books written, I believe that I've achieved storytelling mastery. I know what I'm doing, right? I've worked with this great sensei of writing, and I have taken my own writing in a different direction. And my heart basically takes over all my writing. And I write Pinot's story with all my mystery suspense skills, but also my newfound ability to tap into the human condition. And it was a hard one thing, but it worked when I started revealing my own scars, when revealing that I seriously considered suicide. And because of that, I was able to write about him in a way that I'd never written about anyone before. And, what happens, this story of the heart comes right out of the gate. Interestingly enough, it gets turned down by 10 New York publishers. And then Lake Union realizes what it is, grabs it, works with me. And right out of the gate, the thing goes straight to #1 and hangs in there. And the book still sells tens of thousands of copies a month, 4 years later. The thing has exploded. And this is 51 years after I write the story of the rabbit and the dog. It's my first real explosion. And the book has sold close to 3 million copies as I was introduced, 37 languages. Tom Holland, Spider-Man, going to play Pino Lella. And, people ask me, what's the best part of all of that? And I say, I wouldn't trade any of those things, right? I mean, I'm not foolish. It's incredible. But really what counts to me are the letters that I get from people who are either seriously depressed or suicidal when they picked up the book. And the way I wrote about Pino Lella touched their heart and changed them. And his story changed them. And there's been nothing I've ever done that are more fulfilling than touching souls and changing lives. It's made me fulfilled as a writer and as a human being. And I truly understand now the power of a story to change people's lives. I continue to work on my craft all the time. I try to write every day when I'm writing. When I'm not writing, I don't write. So I write 7 days a week and I'll probably go somewhere between 40 and 60 days in a row. And then I start driving my wife insane and she tells me I have to go somewhere for a while, or we take off together and go somewhere. But basically, I've decided to not write head books anymore. And by that, I'm, a book that's entirely intellectual. One of the things that completely drives me crazy is when I'll read a review of something and they'll say an unsentimental description of X, Y, and Z. And I go, you missed the fucking point. You missed the point. We don't care about, unsentimental analysis in a novel. I want to know something about way things made people feel. Anyway, that's my own little beat. But basically it goes down to this woman that I mentioned earlier. Her name was Estelle Stahl. And as I said, she was one of the first people to believe in me. And I remember having this discussion with me. I said, well, what does it take to learn to be a writer? And she said, you have to study it. You have to use, your brain to analyze, take things apart. How did they do it? How did they make it work? And then I said, well, at what point does it become art? And she said, she looked at me, she goes, well, art's different. Art doesn't take a brain, it takes your heart. And that stuck with me all these years. And I'm a little slow on the uptake, so it took a while for this to penetrate, but it did. And so I'm going to take us back to that shortcut. Body, mind, and heart create state, emotional state, mindset, and mastery. Now, remember what I told you is that the way you carry your body, it determines a lot of your state, how you're feeling at any one moment. Where you're writing from. Are you writing from a state of anxiety? I can guarantee you're in your head. If you're in your head, you're dead. So try to shift, understand where it's coming from. Most people don't write well because they're scared of trying to write well. I try to tell people, don't think about the writing. Let it go. Get in touch with your heart and let it come out. It'll flow out of you and you'll find that you're closer to what you want to write about. So with mastery, coming back to this thing, one of the big things you can see from the course of my career, right? I start out at 7 years old and I don't hit in a big way, until I'm like 56, 57, 58. There's a lot of time in there. And if you're not ready for that kind of time frame, you're probably not going to get there. Now, again, as I said, I pick up stuff slow. It's been the nature of me my entire life. Once I get it, I'm good at it. But I had to figure out ways to keep myself in the game. One is I was always after improvement. I was always after being a different kind of writer, pushing myself. And, I took this journey as one of mastery rather than trying to make a quick hit, trying to sell a lot of books up front. If we go back and look at it, I probably spent 4 years as an apprentice. I don't know, 10, 12 as a journeyman. And even then, I was an extended journeyman. It was probably 18 years after I had gotten from my apprenticeship before I could start thinking of myself as a master writer. And it was 6 years after I considered myself a master writer that I published a literary novel that sold 3 million copies. So you have to ask yourself, what I always believe in anything is, where are you in that process? It always helps to understand where you are if you want to understand where you're going. Are you an apprentice at this point? Are you a journeyman? Are you a beginning or an end journeyman? If you're feeling uncomfortable, you're probably ready to push on to being a master writer, because you're probably going to shift from what you've been writing to try something so outrageous it scares you, right, at a level, and it pushes you. And that's usually that kind of hump that takes you over into what I would call being a master writer. So where are you going? Try to identify what you want out of it. I was looking for the kinds of stories, and I do look for the kinds of stories that move, heal, inspire, and transform people. You know, after Beneath the Scarlet Sky was a big hit, a number of people in the business told me, you'll never find another story like that. And I was like, I don't know. I don't think I went through what I went through not to find another story like that. So sure enough, all of a sudden these emails started coming in and letters, and people were telling me about their aunts and uncles and grandfathers and friends, and a lot of them were really good stories, but they weren't what I was looking for. So I had to come up with a criteria. And I went back and I asked myself, what was it about Beneath the Scarlet Sky that moved so many people? And I came to the conclusion that it was inherently moving, that it was inherently inspiring, that it was inherently healing, and that it was potentially transforming depending on the reader. And so I set out looking for stories like that. And I came close a number of times. And then about maybe 7 months after Beneath gets published, a guy comes up to me in my hometown of Bozeman, Montana, and he's a local retired dentist at the Rotary, and he says, have you ever heard the story of the Martells? And I said, well, like the construction people? And he said, yeah. He said, you need to hear the story of how they came to America. And he said, the entire time I was reading Beneath the Scarlet Sky, that's all I could think about was their story. So 2 days later, I put Bill Martell's, the scion of the family, you know, his address in. It's like 2 miles from my house. And I go down there and I take a left into this older neighborhood, and I get this weird feeling, and I don't really understand why. And, you know, all of a sudden I get to his driveway and it dawns on me, I can't be 250 yards from where I heard the story of Pinolella. So I'm getting all sorts of like shivers and weirdness, and I knock on the door and I spend the first 10 minutes, I'm sitting forward in my chair. Within an hour, I know I'm writing the book, and I'm off and going, because in that hour, Bill Martell opened my heart and made me see, you know, the world in a different way right there. And I said, okay, this is what I want to do it again. So last two things I want to leave you with is that what you're after is a mindset. Your mindset is created by your habits and by your body and by your emotions. So the opposite of mindset, if you go in and you're able to write in a positive mindset, in a emotionally strong mindset, you will write well. You will write far better than you ever will if you're limited or driven by fear. Fear doesn't get anybody anywhere. You know, I've had this discussion with my Indian meditation teachers, and I asked, what about this thing about how that artists have to suffer for their art? And they just think it's the stupidest thing they've ever heard. They go, no, no, no. When great art is created, do you think that Van Gogh was suffering when he was creating that art? Hell no. He was in an ecstatic state. The suffering was behind him, and he created genius. That's what they believe, and I believe it. This stuff about how we're supposed to be angst-ridden and hold on to our heads as if we're so smart that our brains are going to burst out our ears, it's complete nonsense. Don't listen to it. Take a different attitude. And that is one of the most powerful things that I've ever been taught, is you are not supposed to suffer to create art. All the suffering those people were doing is because they couldn't get in a good mental state to write. That's the facts. I mean, do you think Charles Dickens walked around going, oh me, oh my, I'm not going to write the next sentence? No, he had to turn stuff in every 2 weeks. And it was edited on the spot and it became a book. He didn't have time to think about that. Don't give yourself time to think about that. Don't listen to critics. Don't tell anybody what you're doing. I don't tell anybody what I'm doing until I'm ready to show it to them. So these are a lot of things that I do to keep myself going. Another thing is I try to read a book that challenges me at least for 30 minutes to an hour every day. I want to read someone who's better than me. I want to read someone who inspires me to keep trying. I just read Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad and was blown away. I was like, oh my God, I got some work to do, right? To catch up to that guy. And that's good. It's nothing to compare yourself to. It's like, look, this is what somebody else is doing when they open their heart and let it go. And you know what you want to do primarily is in your head, it's the ego, and you want to break it down. You want to get rid of it. And the ego is something that's always like, am I going to be thought a fool for writing like this or writing this book or whatever? Who cares? Let it go. Go somewhere else, right? You want to be very fixed that if you're letting your thoughts and what I call rancid thoughts affect your writing, you're letting yourself down. And if you're comparing yourself to other people, the Indians believe that you're insulting your soul because you're sent here to be an individual. You're the only person who can write like you. You're the only people who has those thoughts. So put them down and be proud of them. And when success does come for you, be humble about it. It's a gift. It's a miracle. And be willing that, you know, when you publish a book, I'll spend 3 weeks in May, you know, working, trying to promote it as much as I can. And June 2nd, I get on a plane and I'm flying to Uganda because I've found another story of heart. And I'm going with former commander of SEAL Team 6 and the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State who brought the story to me, and I'm going with him and interviewing the people for 3 weeks. And I'm going to come back and write again. I think it's about all I had to say. I know I covered a lot of ground pretty quickly, and I want to get to people's questions, but I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me, and I hope that my talk has given you stuff to think about and a way to look at your own writing in the future.
Thank you so much, Mark. Oh, I have so much to think about.
Good.
Where would we start learning how to like master our emotions? I mean, where do you start? Is it with meditation or is there?
Meditation is a great help. It is a great help, but also just learn to mess around with your body. You can try to see what it'll do to your emotion, just the way you stand, the way you sit. You'll find it. You'll feel it. It's instantaneous. Remember, the brain and the body knows no difference. You can summon an emotion from your body position. By the same token, you can reverse it, right? If you've got a bad emotion going, you can switch it by simply changing your body position. If you need to know what your character is going to do, summon the emotion and see how your body responds. It will respond. These things are so intertwined in our system that you'll start feeling it immediately. One of the things I tell a lot of people to do is if you're not feeling it writing, get up and jump up and down as if you were on a little trampoline. That alone will change your entire physiology. And the basis of emotion and controlling emotion is physiology. How do you hold your body? What are you doing when you're doing it? That's how you start.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a question. First of all, I live in Bozeman too, and my old house, this isn't my question, but my old house used to be up the street from Martel Construction. So,
oh yeah,
yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. So I wrote this down, what you said, no one in publishing knows anything. They are all being reactive. And what I'm struggling with right now is being an artistic person connected into a business, and the gatekeepers, the editors, the publishers, and my agent are focused on, this is what makes money. Don't, that's going to be outside your brand. You don't want to do that. And I have the sense that in a lot of ways, it's really shutting me down. There's a part of me that's very practical, and what I do now pays the bills, but there's also a part of me that is filled with longing to do other artistic things. But what I'm finding is that there's not time in the day, and after I've spent half to 3/4 of the day alone at a computer, the last thing I want to do is sort of write the stuff that is the stuff of the heart. Um, and I don't quite know how to resolve that dilemma.
It
I
is a dilemma.
yeah.
It's a dilemma. No, it's a dilemma. I mean, I continue to work with Mr. Patterson. I do a lot of editing and stuff, and for him, that really helps pay the bills. It really does. And I spent enough years struggling monetarily to understand how important it is for writers to have that most beautiful of things, cash flow.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I get it. I get what you're saying. But I would urge you to find times, maybe not in the day where you're working, but find somewhere for a passion project. It really is something it's not hard to work on a passion project. It isn't, because it's your passion project. It's like, all things being equal, this is what I would do, but I'm practical. I got to make money. I got to make this thing work. And even Beneath took me 10 years to write. I wrote probably 8 or 9 other books during that time. But I just kept chipping away at it. And I knew it was something that was going to force me far, far outside my comfort zone. And so I urge you to find a passion project that pushes you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
It's where you'll do your best work.
I also appreciate so much that you said that operating from a place of fear never goes well.
No.
So that fear that I won't have the money to pay the bills next month or whatever. I mean, I just really appreciate what you said tonight. It just really
Sure.
resonated with me.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you.
Yeah. Where do you think James Patterson got his mastery? I know he was in advertising before, but where did he get his mastery of fiction the way he does, the storytelling?
Crazy devoted reader. He reads all the time. He reads and hails stories. It's not just books. He's listening to them. He's watching them on television. He's watching films. He's involved with creating them. He just understands story so instinctively. I would do something, because the way we work is we either craft an outline together, or he's given me them, right? But the whole deal is you're always allowed to change it if it makes it more terrific. That's the goal. So I'll try things to make it more terrific, and sometimes they work, and sometimes he goes, don't do that, because on page 320 this is going to happen, and screw the whole thing up. And you go, wow, he's right. It's impressive. He's just, that's all he thinks about is stories, the stories he's working on. You walk into his office and there's like 20 of them in various stages of completion at all times.
That is amazing.
But again, this idea of changing up stuff, really, I'm a big fan of it now. I'm always working on multiple things.
I don't like just being stuck in one series. So
no, I don't think it's.
I definitely like the idea of changing that up.
Yep.
I have a question.
Yep.
The one thing I've noticed, Mark, I absolutely love the last workshop of yours that I sat through. This one was really informative, but the last one, he actually had us all up dancing and doing his affirmation thing that he does. And it's very empowering. But I've noticed a lot of your projects of your heart are based in World War II era. Is there something
first
about
two
World
anyway.
War II that calls to you?
You know, I was always interested in it, but I wasn't what I would call a World War II buff by any stretch. It's just the story of Pino Lella came to me, and you know, I was like dumbfounded. It was like, okay, this is not too daunting. I don't speak Italian. I don't speak German, right? I'm not familiar with this stuff. I'm going to have to go and start ground zero and teach myself all the way up. And it just so happened that the second story was also a World War II story, and I'd never heard it. You know, I'd heard just about every kind of story with Beneath. It was because there are so few stories that were set in Italy, and I was fascinated by that. And with this story, it was less. You know, a lot of books are about soldiers, etc. And I got fascinated by the people who were just trying to get out of the way, because it turns out like 60 million people were displaced by World War II. And it was like, who writes about that? And no one was. So I decided to write about a family that got displaced. They were just trying to get out of the way of the war. The next book, you know, is not World War II.
One
One
of
I'm
the
about
most,
to go.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The next book is not based in World War II. The next book is based in Uganda 30 years ago. And it's about a boy and a young girl who get kidnapped by this messianic warlord and turned into soldiers. And the only way they survive is about 7 years after the guy gets kidnapped, 5 years after she gets kidnapped, they meet and fall in love. And it's how they survive one of the most horrendous ordeals I've ever heard of by relying on the power of the heart.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm after. There's my filter, right? It's not World War II. It's stories that move, heal, inspire, and transform. If it meets those criteria, I'm in. If I'm not, I'm not in. It's, you know, I just got to the point where I'm no longer interested in writing stories that are dark and that have no hope. I think people, especially in this day and age, are hungry for stories of triumph, personal triumph over insane adversity. And those are the kinds of stories I want to write. And they're the stories I want to spend the rest of my life writing.
Excellent.
Did that answer it, Chris?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. You bet.
Sue Hinken had a question. She said, what is your writing process? Do you mostly outline, or?
Yeah,
You just
here's
get it
another
out
thing that
there?
I learned from Patterson was the power of outlining. I used to be like a Stephen King guy, just jump in the boat and set sail and whatever happened, happened. But that leads to a lot of revision. I mean, like full scale revision. And I have found that, you know, again, I'm a professional writer. I don't dawdle around. And so what I began doing was, I mean, his outlines are probably 45 pages long. My outlines are 250 pages long. I go all the way through, and I'm writing what's coming down. You know, I've got things that I'm pushing. Snippets of dialogue will go in, the purpose of the scene will go in, and I go all the way to the end. And I see if I think it can work. And if it can't work, I go back and I try to figure out why when it's still, you know, it's under construction. I really don't know exactly how it's going to work. But by working on that outline for, you know, as much as 3 months, I really have an understanding of how to write it. And the thing I like about that is that it frees me, right? Because I almost never look at the outline. Like never. I mean, maybe once or twice during the course of a book. Because I've already been there. I know the story, and now I'm just trying to tell the story as best I can, right? I'm trying to use my skill set it's the best of my possible ability to hook people in, to keep them interested, to use every narrative tactic and technique that I can to keep them glued to the page, because that's my job. I want them to go all the way to the end. And I want them to be profoundly affected at the end, right? So one of the ways that I like to think, I've told people this, my son, who's 29, just about to publish his first novel, yay, Connor. He and I are writing a piece for Writer's Digest about how do you increase tension in stories. And one of the things that I do is I try to use an image all the time, is that there's a hook to the left of the first letter of the first word of the first sentence of the first paragraph of the first chapter. It's right there. And if I do this right, there's a line that's like a monofilament that goes through every letter of every word of every sentence of every paragraph of every chapter in the book, and it's connected to the last sentence of the book. In the last sentence of the book, of my books, I try to write them such that they have the most weight, right? They're the thing. And if I do it right, that tension, right? Because the reader doesn't get hooked probably till the end of chapter 1. So it's just, you got to imagine that weight is falling and it pulls that hook and grabs them, and they have no choice. They're going. And anything that, in my later editing, anything that I think is going to interfere with that, it goes out. If it's not part of that thing that's moving towards the scene with the most weight and the sentence with the most weight, I'm not doing my job, and I got to go back and figure it out. Because I want to have impact on readers. I do. I want them to be impacted heavily by what I write. Does that help? How do I manage to write in Patterson's voice? This is interesting. I don't write in Patterson's voice. We write in a voice that's unlike mine and unlike his. We meet in the middle ground. It sounds like him. It sounds like me. And that was another one of the first things he told me.
Does he mainly give you an outline of what the book is supposed to be, or do you work together on the plot? And then do you
Quite
both?
often we work together. Yeah, quite often we work together.
Sabrina said, did I hear you correctly that you wrote a text once that you felt was being told to you by someone? I think
No, a book.
A book, yeah.
A book. Yeah, the purification ceremony. I've had that experience, multiple times now, but it almost always seems to just come out of the blue, where with the purification ceremony, I tried writing it as a male at first, and it was fundamentally uninteresting because everybody's heard of a male deer hunter, but how many females? At the time, I was writing this in 1994, but I grew up with, there were a lot of women in my family who hunted, so it didn't seem strange. But the second that I changed to that voice and let this woman start speaking, it was like plugged in, and she was talking and I was taking dictation. Really, it was crazy. I mean, I don't know about you, but it's what I live for as an author, to get in those states where you're connected to something beyond yourself, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see. Do you think it's worthwhile then for somebody who's just starting out to just take a year or two and just read? I mean,
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to give, this is a piece of advice, and I've only known one person who's done it. Okay. And if you talk to Robert Crace, Greg Hurwitz, Chris Mooney, Joseph Finder, a bunch of my friends, every single one of these people are incredibly successful writers, and they all started out the same way. They started reading books, going back and reading books that they loved, and they tore them apart to figure out how they worked. So the only person that I know that we've given this advice to is my son, right? And he actually did it. He was working for me as a researcher. He spent the past 5 years of his life doing nothing but reading in the genre that he wanted to write in, which was kind of Vince Flynn and Brad Thor. And he wrote this book that was totally surprising. I'm a dad pride, right? But I was blown away by what he had done, because he had really, really done his homework, and it showed. And because of that, his first novel went to an auction between David Baldacci's editor and Vince Flynn's and Flynn's one.
Wow.
And he'll be published 3 days before he turns 30. But he'll tell you, you ask him why did it work? And he said, well, I took all your guys' advice, and I basically sat down and I read them and I tore them apart and figured out why they worked and why they didn't. And I studied them. And then, he'll tell you that the benefit of having me for a dad was that he could see the kind of grit it takes to make it. You have to hang in there sometimes for a long time. Not everybody gets, it's a dream, right? It could be a debut novelist and the thing explode, but the likelihood is it's not. You're going to have to build yourself. You're going to have to work your way up.
Yeah. And
but it is an odd, go ahead.
Sorry. I just think in this day of instant gratification and everybody comparing themselves to everyone else, that they want to get out there faster and quicker, and they don't. But what they really need to do, the best thing to do, is actually step back and take that time and realize that it is a journey. It's going to be 20, 30 years, like you say.
It could be, or it could be 5. My first hit was 3.5, 4 years into it, when I wrote The Purification Ceremony, and it did well. It was New York Times bestseller and stuff. But then after that, it was kind of like fair to middling. It was going all over the place. And it was mostly, to be honest, is because I hadn't really stopped to think about really why I wanted to be a writer and what I wanted to do. It wasn't until I shifted from I want to be a writer so that I'm famous or whatever, or sell a bunch of books, to I want to have an impact. And once I decided I wanted to have an impact, the whole thing shifted, right? Because I was writing for different reasons, right? I figured I don't care how many I have an impact on. I want to have an impact on people when I write. And once I made that decision, it was like the universe just sort of clicked, and Patterson came into my life, and all these things started happening, which paved the way for me to do what I'm doing right now, right? Which is writing stories that I believe will have widespread, massive impact.
I love that. Any other questions? I so think that's true, is listening to the universe and following, just listening, and things will come into your life, and that direction.
One of the things, a really profound thing somebody told me is that prayer is where you talk to God and meditation is where you listen. And I've always loved that, because it's true. So if you want to calm your mind enough to write well, meditate first.
What's the name of the book you recommended for meditation?
It's not a book, it's an app.
Or an app?
Yeah, it's called The Breathing Room. The
Breathing Room. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
It's by a woman named Preethaji, Preethaji. She also wrote a tremendous book that I ended up blurbing, because I got this call, she's written a book on meditation, will you read it? And I was like, a book on meditation, why don't I just suck a gun right now, right? But I read the thing on a flight between New York and Bozeman, and I was blown away by it. And that's why I became her student, because and that's called The 4 Sacred Secrets by Preethaji and Krishnaji. It's a great book. It's about this long. You can read it in 2 or 3 hours at the most. But she walks you through the meditations in the book. She explains why you do them and what the effect will be. So for like 25 years, I did Zen meditation, and I hated every second of it. It's just because they just tell you to sit there. They don't tell you anything. You chant a couple chants every once in a while, but it's basically, oh yeah, sit there for 20 years and you'll figure it out. Well, no, she's like, no, you can figure it out right now. This is how you do it, and this is what you do it for. And the one that I recommend, you can find it, I think, on YouTube still, is The Great Soul Sync. It basically just puts you in touch with your heart. I do it almost every day. when I'm writing. I sometimes, if I start to waver, I'll stop and I'll do it again. Because it only takes, 8 to 11 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you so
bet.
much.
Thank you.
So much
Thank
great
you all.
advice. I can't wait to start.
Yeah,
Good,
that is right.
great.
An amazing journey.
What is that?
It is.
The great soul what?
Sync,
Thanks.
Think.
like synchronize.
Okay, think. Okay.
Are you going to tell us what the last green sky is about?
The last Green Valley is
Valley.
about a family, a young family, mom, dad, and 2 boys. And they are ethnic Germans who live in Ukraine. They've lived there with in their families for generations, from like 1790, when Catherine the Great realized that the soil of what we call the Ukraine now is the most fertile on earth. And she needed the grain to be able to feed Russia, and the serfs in Ukraine couldn't grow wheat worth a damn. So she offered, like 500 hectares to every German who would come and farm. So they did, and they formed these colonies, and everything's good until the Bolsheviks come, and the Bolsheviks throw them off their land, because their whole idea of things was that if you were any good at anything, you were suspect, and you should be thrown in the gulag, right, or killed. And so they get thrown off their land, they get starved. Hitler invades in 41, and the first thing he does goes to the ethnic Germans and says, "You want your land back?" And of course they say, "Yeah." And they start growing, and they have a pretty decent life for about 18 months. And as the book begins, Stalin is counterattacking, and the Martells have a horrible choice. Do they stay and wait for the Soviet bear to return? Or they run with the wolves, the Nazis that they've come to despise? And they decide to run with the wolves, because the wolves have decided to protect them, because Heinrich Himmler believes that they are the last true Aryan blood on earth.
Wow.
And what happens is wild. It's a crazy story.
I've already got it on my Audible list. Can't wait.
Great. We just got it at my house, Audible.
Everybody go get the pre-order. Get it on your list.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate your time. I hope it helps.
Oh, it does.
We need more writers, not less. This is the way to keep writers around, right?
Right.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Bet.
Thank you.
You bet.
We really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.